Hello, all, and welcome to the Periscope podcast, where we discuss all things CHS. Sit down and get comfortable as you join us for this episode of Why I Love, where we discuss what we're currently loving.
Hello, my name is Hannah Sterner of the CHS Periscope staff, and I'm interviewing my good friend, sophomore Mayana Brown, today about 80s movies, because I know that this topic is one of her passions that she talks about a lot. Mayana, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So first, let's talk about you a little. What led you to watching 80s films?
I was just on TikTok one day and an edit from an 80s film came up and I was like, oh, this is cool. And the movie happened to be Stand By Me. And I watched the movie because I thought that edit looked cool. And yeah.
So you mentioned Stand By Me as the movie that got you into the 80s era. Are there any other films that really spoke out to you?
Well, some of my favorite other films from the 80s are The Goonies and like The Karate Kid and Bill and Ted's Adventure, basically just like the classics from the 80s.
So what is it about 80s movies that makes them stand out to you from like the rest of the film industry?
I think what makes them stand out is the fact that a lot of them were like based around kids like close to my age. Like a lot of them were coming of age movies. I think just the fact that I can like relate to it makes them a lot better.
Now, how do you think that this era of movies has impacted the film industry as we know movies to be today?
Well, not even just the film industry, just Hollywood in general. For example, like Stranger Things, it's based on the 80s, and a lot of the inspiration for that came from 80s movies such as like The Goonies. And yeah, 80s films have just like totally like a couple years ago, the 80s was like super popular, and it was because of these 80s movies that it was so popular that they ended up making like new 80s movies and 80s shows and stuff.
Now, I know you mentioned Stranger Things as well, and I've seen most of Stranger Things. It's a great show, and I know a lot of like even 80s actors have appeared in the show, like Winona Ryder and Sean Astin from The Goonies. Do you think that their acting has progressed, or like how would you compare their acting now to back then in the 80s?
They're still great actors, but for example, Sean Astin isn't like in as many movies as he was back then, and neither is Winona Ryder. So I feel like a lot of 80s actors have kind of fell off, but they're still really good actors for what they do appear in.
Now, what other actors from this era have you looked up to?
My favorites have to be River Phoenix and Keanu Reeves. My cat's named after River Phoenix. They just have like really great movies and they're like inspirational too.
Now, I've already mentioned actors, but are there any particular directors that you find yourself watching all of their movies or like keep watching their movies over and over again?
I'm not a huge fan. I'm not like a fan of like a lot of directors, but I really love Rob Reiner in particular. His movies are really good. For some other movies I like from him are Misery and Flipped.
So if we do the math, these movies are around like 40 years old. What do you think makes them still work in 2022?
I think they still work just because the fact like I said, most of these movies are like coming of age movies, and even though times were different back then, kids still feel like they can relate to it, or like even people in general just will be like, oh, I wish my life was like that. I wish I had fun like the people in those movies.
So if someone listening wanted to start watching these films, what would you recommend as the best starting spot, the one that you think will hook them in on the 80s movies?
I have like a couple different. If you love coming of age movies, definitely Stand By Me. But if you like more like comedy, I would say Bill and Ted's Adventure. And if you like more horror-ish movies, maybe The Lost Boys. It's not that much horror, but it's still a little bit scary.
So is there anything else you'd like to add that I haven't really asked you about?
No, I think pretty much everything's covered. Just like go watch the movies right now, guys.
So thanks for joining us today, Mayana. For those of you listening, thanks for tuning in to our very first episode of Why I Love. If you would like to be on a future episode, please let us know. You can email us at chsperiscope@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram at CHS Periscope. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Periscope podcast. Please keep in mind the discussion in our podcast reflects the opinions or views of the hosts and guests, not the current Periscope staff, CHS administration, or the CHS student body. Follow us on all platforms at CHS Periscope and visit our website chsperiscope.com for more.